Hello and welcome to Must Read Fiction, a place for people who know that life is better with a novel in hand. I'm Erin Popelka, and I'm so delighted to be here today with author Cheryl A. Ossola. Welcome.
Thank you, Erin. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, it's truly my pleasure. Cheryl A. Ossola was a magazine editor and freelance writer and editor in the San Francisco Bay Area for 18 years until she chucked it all to move to Italy to travel, eat, and write. Her essays, articles, short fiction, and poetry have been published in Writer's Digest, 14 Hills, Switchback, and Dance Magazine, among others. Her debut novel, The Wild Impossibility, hit bookstores in May 2019. So this is so exciting. Congratulations on your debut. Please tell me about it. Tell me about The Wild Impossibility.
Oh, thanks so much. Well, it's one of those things that I spent my life saying, "Oh, someday I'll write a novel," because I was an avid reader from a very young age. Um, and then I just didn't. Everybody. It sounds good to say you're going to write a novel, but to actually do it is much harder. I didn't actually start to write or try to write until I was in my 40s. And it got to the point where it just it wasn't optional anymore. And The Wild Impossibility is actually its own bit of impossibility because I was, I think, a few days shy of 63 years old when it was published.
Amazing.
So better late than never, as they say. I'll try to limit the cliches here. And the other thing was that it actually started life as my MFA thesis. And about, I think, 0.1% of MFA theses actually ever become books. So it was a story I wanted to tell, and I wasn't going to let go of it. And it had a long, long road to publication, but I'm really happy that it's out there now.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you for taking that leap, for acknowledging that it wasn't optional anymore, that you needed to tell the story. So tell me about the story that is The Wild Impossibility.
Um, well, it's a story of two women who are connected in kind of an unusual way. So my protagonist, Kira, is a young woman who begins to believe that she is experiencing the memories of someone she never met. And she comes to believe that it's actually her grandmother who died before Kira was born, her grandmother, Maddalena. And so, needless to say, this is a rather disconcerting thing that's going on, and she's quite freaked out by it. And but she also believes, she eventually comes to believe that this is happening for a reason, and that she's not just having a strange experience, that there's actually a purpose for it. And as she tries to discover what that is, intercut with her story, we get the story of her grandmother, Maddalena, who was a teenager during World War II. She's a young Italian-American girl living in Owens Valley, California, which is very near Nevada, and it's where the Japanese internment camp Manzanar was during World War II. And in a very strange sequence of events, Maddalena falls in love with a boy at Manzanar. And so we get her whole love story interwoven with Kira's attempts to uncover what is happening and why is she having these memories.
Oh, fascinating. What really interesting questions and what an interesting set of circumstances. Which leads me to my next question, which is that, like, I know that, some of these metaphysical ththings are at play in the book. And I know that as you were writing the book, there were also some strange circumstances that came into play. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it seems perhaps in hindsight, even more strange than it was at the time, because, you know, the book is about the possibility of strange emotional connections over time and distance and all of that. And so when I was doing research, and I went to Manzanar, to the historic site there, and I had a problem. I had a teenage girl who needed to fall in love with a teenage boy who's in prison. So if they can't be together, there's no love story. But I wanted them to be together in a way that was true to history, that was that I didn't want to minimize at all the absolutely horrific conditions that the Japanese were put into. And I mean, they were in barbed wire with you know, armed guards and searchlights. This was not just like a lower security prison. This was maximum security. And so what do you do? How do you solve that problem? And while I was there doing research, in the motel room was a fishing magazine, which I would normally never look at, but the person I was with did, and said, "Oh, hey, you should read this. There's an article in here about a new documentary called the Manzanar Fishing Club." So I read the article, and it was about a group of men at Manzanar who would sneak under the fence at night, go out into the Sierra and fish all day, and then come back at night. And this was dangerous. Towards the end of the camp's life, it was a little less so. The guards got more lenient, but it was definitely a dangerous thing to do. And I said, "That's it. That's it. My guy can get out." People did get out. And so they couldn't go anywhere because they were Japanese Americans in a valley full of white people. So even if they had tried to, you know, walk to a town or whatever, that would never have solved anything. So they always came back. But that was my way for them to get together. And so that was, you know, that was something that was like step one. But I said I needed to know more. Well, it turned out that the Manzanar Fishing Club had just been released. I went back home to Berkeley, looked at the movie listings. It was the last night of the run of the Manzanar Fishing Club at a theater a mile from my house. It was the last show. I literally threw my things in a corner, got in my car, and went to the movie, and just sat there in the dark taking notes. It was unbelievable.
Oh my word, I'm getting like tears. Like it is such like a fantastic constellation of circumstances that came together to make it happen. You're right, because sometimes when we're writing these things, we get ourselves into like a little corner, and it's like, you know, people think, oh, fiction, like, oh, you can just make it all up, it's totally fine. But you know, you do have to stay true to history, you have to stay true to what happened. And sometimes there's just no getting around the fact that, like, yes, your two folks had to meet and fall in love under believable circumstances. So I am so grateful for the Manzanar Fishing Club, and I'm so grateful you found out about them.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, sure, people take liberties with historical fiction. I did too, because people in the San Francisco Bay Area were not interned at Manzanar. They were sent to other camps. But I used Manzanar because that was the one I could get to. So I don't mind making those kinds of changes, but I was not going to suggest that my teenage boy could just easily meet up with a girl outside the camp. I was not going to minimize the experience that way. So I think, you know, I think when you're writing historical fiction, you have a responsibility, and you need to know where you can ease up on the truth and where you have to absolutely stick with the facts.
Oh, so interesting. And so I know that like some of the pieces of the Wild Impossibility kind of came from some of your real life experience. Like the book is not autobiographical, but
Not at all.
Kira, the main character, is a neonatal ICU nurse, and I know that you also worked as a neonatal ICU nurse. So can you tell me a little bit more about like some of your life experiences that made it into the novel, or any sort of stories or family histories that may have worked their way in?
Um, yeah, there's actually very little. Kira is a neonatal ICU nurse for one reason, and that is that the experience that she has in the book, where she sees babies who are the size of your hand, right, who are going to die. She sees them hang on to that shred of life until usually it's the mother arrives, and then they die. And I saw that. And, there is no explanation for it. And some people might say, oh, you're romanticizing it. That's not really what happened. But I saw it enough to believe that that was true. And so the reason Kira is a neonatal ICU nurse is because that experience is sort of like she thinks of it as the ultimate example of entanglement. If mothers and their babies aren't entangled, who is?
Sure, sure.
Even as mothers, we carry fetal blood cells in our bodies for decades. So that's why she is the nurse, and that's really the only autobiographical thing in there. There are little bits and pieces of people I know, or traits, ideas, but I didn't like base a character on this person or do anything like that. Certainly Kira's mother has a few traits that were my own mother's, but her mother is not my mother by a long shot. So there's really not anything else other than that little bit of neonatal ICU stuff that's truly autobiographical.
Oh, interesting. And what both like a heartbreaking and compelling story and experience to share. Kind of with those tiny little babies. Yeah, waiting for their mothers before they die. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being there for them with that, and for sharing that through Kira. Like then that we all kind of get to have that experience with her in those really hard moments. And so my next question is, in your bio, you talk about chucking your 18-year career in the Bay Area and moving to Italy, which I think may be kind of like a dream for so many of us, to like
Yeah.
chuck it all, go somewhere amazing, focus on your creative practice. So I was wondering if you could just take a few minutes and talk about what that experience has been like for you. Like, has there been anything that surprised you about it? And how has it been, kind of making that leap?
Well, if you're thinking about moving to Italy, just be aware that it's incredibly difficult to uproot yourself and go into a new world, and completely transformative and worth it. So moving to Italy was, for most of my life, what I would have considered a pipe dream. I'm Italian American. I am hugely proud of that part of myself. And I always said, oh, someday I'm going to live in Italy. Well, due to circumstances, I didn't even travel outside of the US until I was in my 40s. So that wasn't a very practical dream. However, my dad died quite young. He was 58. And when he died, he had not done all the things that he wanted to do. Everything was going to be when he retired. And he never got to do that. And so I carried that around with me, this idea that, if something is important, you have to do it. But of course, life gets in the way, and you have children, and you do this, and careers, and whatnot. And all of a sudden you go, wow, I'm older than my dad was when he died. So that combined with to be honest, it got to be very, very difficult to live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I worked 2 jobs for a decade and a half. And I just woke up one morning in summer of 2016, and said, okay, I'm on a 5-year plan and I'm moving to Italy. And in about 3 weeks, I said, no, I'm going next year.
Wow.
So yeah, it was kind of like, well, why, what are you waiting for? It's just, it's getting, you're just existing here. You're working so you can pay bills. And is this how you want to spend your life? You know? So I did just decide that I would, the original plan was to wait. I was planning to try to get dual citizenship, and I was going to wait for that, but that can be a long process. And so I just decided if I could get a visa, I would go. And, but I had to put my house on the market without knowing if I had the visa. So I just took this leap of faith, and I sold my house, and it closed escrow on the day I got on the plane.
Wow.
And I never looked back. So it is, it's been hard in ways that I didn't anticipate. It's now my new struggle is, you know, I'm in Italy and I want to travel and I want to learn, and I'm obsessed with art. So, you know, I want to go to museums and I want to read, and but I also want to write. So now it's trying to figure out that balance. And of course, and then language learning is the other third, because you have no quality of life without it. And so trying to balance those 3 things is the hard part at this point. But
Oh, well, congratulations on taking the leap. It does sound like it was sort of like the perfect confluence of all the timing coming together. What an inspiration. And then the other thing that I just find so inspiring about the story of the Wild Impossibility, and you mentioned it earlier, was that it was published just shy of your 63rd birthday. And so, as my last question, I wonder if you have any advice for, you know, kind of folks who might be a little later in life, you know, readers, writers, about how to tap into your creative process in your 60s and beyond.
oh, I don't think people would like my advice because it's pretty blunt. It's just, as one of my instructors in my MFA program said, butt in chair, words on page. That's it.
I mean,
You know,
there's no getting around it, right?
talk about writing, we can talk about wanting to write, we can talk about wishing we had written, you know, we can talk about these ideas that we have, but until they're on the page, none of that matters. And so, you know, yeah, people all the time are, oh, I want to write, or, oh, I've got this great idea. And it's like, well, you can't just think about it. You have to do the work. But I do think that there are you have to know yourself to know how best to do that. And, you know, some people are better with pen and paper. Some people are better on a computer, but jumping around and writing scenes out of sequence as it comes to them. As far as process goes, the best process is yours. Whatever process, my favorite, another cliche, God, I'm full of cliches today, is whatever works. You know, if it works for you, then that's what you do. And it doesn't matter what some famous author says or what your writing group partner says or anything else. If it works for you, that's what you do. But you do it, but you have to do it. So.
Which I think is actually beautiful words to close on, because I certainly am like, all right, I got to get my butt in the chair. It's time to get some work done. So thank you for writing The Wild Impossibility, for being such a fantastic inspiration, and thank you so very much for taking the time to speak with me today. This was such a pleasure.
No, thanks so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure for me.